I'm Tony, 32, and for most of my life, I've been labeled as the quiet one in the family, the one who doesn't cause trouble, doesn't argue, doesn't stand out. My parents, especially my mom, always said I was sensitive, which was their polite way of saying disappointment. I was the one who went into something safe but boring, according to them, a career in IT, while my older brother, Ryan, was the golden boy. He was charismatic, loud, always the center of attention, and no matter what he did, he had this way of making everyone believe he was extraordinary. Even when he messed up, my parents somehow turned it into a story of resilience. Me? If I made one small mistake, it was proof that I'd never had what it takes. It's funny how you grow up thinking that one day your family will finally see you for who you are, an adult, independent, capable, but some families never let go of the old roles. Every Thanksgiving, I hoped things would be different. I'd tell myself, maybe this year they'll just treat me like a person, not a disappointment wrapped in politeness. But this last Thanksgiving, it was the day I finally realized that I'd been fooling myself all along. The moment I walked into my parents' house, the air was thick with that usual blend of fake warmth and underlying tension. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house, and laughter came from the dining room. But when I stepped in, it quieted just slightly, just enough for me to notice. My mom's eyes flicked up, scanning me like she was checking if I'd dressed appropriately. My dad gave me that half smile that wasn't really a smile, more like a nod of acknowledgement. Ryan, of course, stood up with his glass raised. "Look who finally decided to show up," he said, grinning wide. Everyone laughed, even my aunt, who barely knew why. "Traffic," I said calmly, setting the dessert I brought, a homemade pie, on the counter. Figured I'd try to contribute. "Oh, Tony, you didn't have to do that," Mom said with a too bright smile. "You know baking isn't really your thing." I just smiled faintly. "Well, I managed." Ryan leaned against the counter beside her, eyeing the pie like it was an art project gone wrong. "You sure it's edible this time? Remember last year's experiment?" He laughed at his own joke, and Mom joined in, shaking her head fondly. They always did that, laugh at me together, like it was harmless teasing. But when you grow up being the punchline, you start to realize the laughter isn't as innocent as it sounds. Dinner was the usual performance. My mom talking about how hard Ryan worked, my dad chiming in about Ryan's ambition, and Ryan sitting there soaking it all in, as if he'd earned every word. I sat quietly, listening, cutting my food into tiny pieces. Every time I tried to speak, someone interrupted. When I mentioned that my company had promoted me to a senior position, my mom barely blinked. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, before turning to Ryan. "Didn't your firm just give you another bonus?" He nodded smugly. "Yeah, I'm basically managing the whole department now." It was a lie. I knew it because I'd heard through a mutual friend that Ryan had been reprimanded at work for missing deadlines. But my parents never verified anything he said. They just believed him. Because that's what Ryan did. He told stories, and they swallowed them whole. I sat there smiling, nodding, doing what I always did, pretending it didn't bother me. Pretending I didn't notice how my dad only asked Ryan questions, how my mom leaned toward him like he was a celebrity guest. I'd grown used to fading into the background. But something about that night felt different. There was this undercurrent, a cruel excitement in the air that I couldn't quite place. Then came the toast. My dad stood, his glass raised, and said, "Let's all give thanks for another wonderful year together." Everyone lifted their glasses. "To family," he said. "To family," they echoed. But Ryan wasn't done. He grinned, stood up with exaggerated confidence, and said, "Actually, I've got one more toast." The room quieted a bit, curious. "Here's to Mom's favorite," he said, looking directly at me. "Still the family's biggest failure." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Then I saw the smirks around the table, my aunt's awkward laugh, my dad's amused exhale, my mom covering her mouth like she was embarrassed but entertained. "Ryan," Mom said in that fake scolding tone, but she was smiling. "What?" Ryan said innocently. "It's just a joke. Tony knows I'm kidding, right?" I stared at him for a long second. My fork rested halfway between my plate and my mouth. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Sure." I took another bite of turkey and looked around the table, really looking this time, at all of them. They weren't just laughing, they were enjoying it. Even Dad. That was the moment something inside me clicked. I realized that nothing I'd ever done, or could do, would change how they saw me. And for the first time, instead of trying to fix it, I just accepted it. I nodded slowly, swallowed my bite, and thought, enjoy this. It's the last time I'll sit at this table. After dinner, while everyone was in the living room, I excused myself early. Got some work tomorrow, I said. No one protested. Ryan just called out, don't stay up all night coding, little bro. I smiled politely, grabbed my coat, and left. The cold air outside felt like freedom. I walked to my car, started the engine, and just sat there for a minute, staring at the house through the windshield. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I just felt done. That night, when I got home, I pulled out the envelope sitting in my desk drawer, the one from my late grandmother's lawyer. She'd left behind a modest inheritance to be split between Ryan and me, but there was a clause. We both had to sign the release form together to access it. My parents had been pressuring me for months to hurry up and sign, saying Ryan had plans for the money. I'd been stalling, saying I wanted time to review the terms. Now, sitting there under the soft hum of my desk lamp, I finally understood why I'd been hesitating. A week later, the call came. It was Ryan. His voice was unusually tight. Hey, Tony. Just wondering, did you sign those inheritance papers yet? I glanced at the envelope on my desk, the unbroken seal, and felt a slow, calm smile spread across my face. Not yet, I said. He exhaled sharply. You need to, man. The lawyer's been trying to finalize everything, and Mom's getting frustrated. We can't move forward until you do. Oh, I said casually, leaning back in my chair. So you need me now? What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said softly. Just funny timing, that's all. He started to say something else, but I cut him off. I'll think about it. And before he could reply, I hung up. Then I picked up the papers from my desk, ran my thumb over the crisp edges, and smirked to myself. They wanted to laugh at me, to treat me like the family failure? Fine. But they were about to find out what happens when the quiet one decides he's had enough. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This time, the story wouldn't end with me walking away quietly. It would end with them realizing that they should have never underestimated me. And that thought alone was enough to make me sit back, take a slow breath, and start planning. The next few days after Thanksgiving were oddly quiet. No calls from Mom, no texts from Dad, not even a snide meme from Ryan. He loved sending those passive-aggressive family jokes about being the responsible sibling, while I was the one still figuring it out. But this time, nothing. Just silence. And I didn't mind it one bit. I focused on work, logged long hours, and kept my mind off the Thanksgiving humiliation. But then, the quiet ended. One afternoon, as I was closing my laptop, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. We're having a family dinner Sunday. Don't be late this time. No question mark, no greeting. Just an order. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But part of me wanted to see where this was heading. They were probably going to pressure me again about the inheritance. So I decided to go, but on my terms. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain or defend myself. I was going to listen, watch, and take mental notes. When I arrived Sunday evening, Ryan's new car was parked right out front, a shiny black SUV that I knew he couldn't afford. He must have either taken out another loan or convinced my parents to help him again. Inside, the atmosphere was the same as always. My mom fluttering around the kitchen, my dad sitting in his usual spot with the TV on, pretending not to notice how loud everyone was. Ryan leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, clearly waiting for me. Tony, Mom greeted, her tone clipped but polite. Glad you could make it. You're early. Yeah, I said, hanging my coat. Didn't want to miss the family meeting. Ryan looked up, smirking. Meeting? Oh, come on, don't make it sound so serious. Mom gave him a little look that said, let me handle this, and turned to me. Actually, we did want to discuss something important, she said sweetly. It's about Grandma's inheritance. There it was. I took a seat, folded my hands, and waited. You know your grandmother always wanted the best for you boys, Mom began, her voice syrupy with fake tenderness. And she trusted you to be responsible with her gift. But Ryan has an opportunity, one that could benefit everyone if we act quickly. Ryan jumped in. Yeah, my friend's starting a new real estate investment group, and I could get in early if we free up the funds now. But the lawyer says he can't release the money until you sign. I leaned back, studying him. So it's not for everyone. It's for you. Mom sighed. as if I were being deliberately difficult. Tony, don't be petty. Ryan has a plan. You've always said you weren't in a rush to use the money. Dad finally spoke, his voice low and dismissive. Your brother's actually doing something productive with his share. You could learn from that. By giving him mine. I asked quietly. My mom gave me that sharp look she used when I was a teenager, the one that meant, don't push it. You're not giving him anything, she said quickly. You'd both benefit if his investment pays off. And if it doesn't? I asked. Ryan shrugged, smiling too confidently. It will. Don't be negative. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. They thought they were cornering me, the same way they always did, pressuring, guilt-tripping, manipulating. But this time, I wasn't the same person sitting quietly, trying to earn approval. I'll think about it, I said calmly, standing up. But I'm not signing anything yet. Mom's smile faltered. Tony, don't make this difficult. We're just trying to help Ryan get ahead. Then maybe he should do it on his own, I said, walking toward the door. Behind me, Ryan muttered something under his breath, and Dad's voice rose. Don't you walk out in the middle of a discussion, son. I turned, meeting his eyes. That's exactly what I'm doing. And I left. That night, I sat on my couch replaying the entire evening in my head. The tone, the expressions, the rehearsed concern. It wasn't new. It was just clearer now. My whole life, I'd been the safety net for Ryan's failures, the background character in my own story. And they didn't even hide it anymore. Over the next week, the messages started coming in one after another. Mom, Ryan's getting anxious. Can you just be reasonable and sign? Dad, you're holding up family business for no reason. Ryan, dude, stop being dramatic. It's just money. I ignored them all. Then, on Thursday, I came home to find my dad's car parked in my driveway. He was sitting on my front porch, arms crossed. That was unusual. He rarely came over unless it was something serious. When I stepped out of my car, he stood. We need to talk, he said. Inside, he didn't even sit down. Your mother's upset, he began. You embarrassed her by storming out. I didn't storm out, I said evenly. I left when the conversation became one-sided. He frowned. You're being selfish. That inheritance could make a big difference for this family. For Ryan, you mean? For all of us, he snapped. Your brother's been struggling, and instead of helping, you're making it harder. I stared at him. So I'm responsible for his bad decisions now? Dad's expression hardened. You wouldn't understand. Ryan's always had more drive, more charisma. If he had a bit of your stability and you had a bit of his ambition, maybe you'd both be better off. I actually laughed. You mean if I had his recklessness and he had my work ethic? His eyes flashed with irritation. You always twist everything. No, I said quietly. I just finally see things clearly. He didn't like that answer. He muttered something about ingratitude and left soon after, slamming the door behind him. I sat there for a while, staring at the closed door, feeling this strange mix of anger and calm. For once, I wasn't doubting myself. I wasn't replaying the argument, wondering if I'd gone too far. Because deep down, I knew I was right. Still, the situation wasn't over. It never was with them. 2 days later, Ryan showed up unannounced. I was in the middle of fixing something on my computer when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, he was standing there, smiling like nothing had happened. Bro, he said, stepping inside before I could answer. Why are you being so uptight about this? We could both benefit if I invest first. I crossed my arms. What's in it for me? He blinked, caught off guard. Well, the profits, obviously. Which I'm supposed to trust you'll share? He sighed. Come on, man, don't be like that. I'm your brother. That's exactly the problem. He frowned, the fake charm slipping. You've always been jealous, you know that? Ever since we were kids. You think I don't notice how you sit there, judging me? Jealous. I repeated quietly. You think I'm jealous of you? He smirked. You've always wanted what I had. Attention, confidence, the ability to actually make things happen. But you never had the guts. I laughed softly. Ryan, I don't want your life. I just don't want to keep cleaning up after it. That hit a nerve. His smile dropped. You're going to regret this, he said, his voice lower now. Mom and Dad aren't going to forget how you're treating them. I'll take my chances, I said, walking to the door and opening it. He hesitated, clearly wanting the last word. You've always been the weak one, Tony. Always will be. I didn't respond. I just held the door until he finally left. That night, though, I couldn't help but think about his words. Not because I believed them, but because it was so typical. Whenever Ryan couldn't get his way, he attacked. Whenever my parents couldn't manipulate, they guilt. It was the same pattern over and over. But something about this time felt different. They weren't just trying to get me to sign some papers. They were trying to remind me of my place. And I'd already decided I wasn't going back to that. The next morning, I called the lawyer who handled my grandmother's estate. I have some questions about the inheritance terms, I said, specifically about what happens if only one heir signs. The lawyer explained everything carefully, confirming what I'd suspected. Without my signature, the money couldn't be released. And if Ryan tried to force the issue, it would become a legal matter. That knowledge gave me a quiet kind of satisfaction. Not vindictive, just steady, controlled relief. I wasn't powerless anymore. That weekend, I got another call, Mom again. This time, her tone was different. Softer, careful. Tony, honey, she began. I think we may have misunderstood each other. Ryan didn't mean to make you feel pressured. I stayed silent. I just think, she continued, that if you really love this family, you'd want to help your brother get on his feet. He's had a harder time than you think. I closed my eyes and exhaled. You mean the time he got fired for missing deadlines? Or when he spent his bonus on a car he couldn't afford? Her pause was long. That's not fair. He's trying. So am I said. But you never noticed. Tony, she said softly, her voice almost trembling now. You've always been so cold. Your father and I worry about you. You isolate yourself, you hold grudges. I stopped her. Mom, I'm not isolating myself. I'm protecting myself. There was silence on the line. Then, quietly, she said, if your grandmother could see this, she'd be disappointed. I felt something in my chest tighten, but I didn't let it show. If Grandma were here, I said, she'd tell you to stop using her memory to manipulate me. I hung up. That was the moment I realized they weren't going to stop. They would twist, guilt, and push until I either gave in or walked away completely. And for the first time in my life, I knew which one I was going to choose. But before I could take that step, something else happened, something that shifted everything. A week later, Ryan called me again, his voice sharp and panicked. Tony, you didn't sign over the inheritance, did you? I looked down at the sealed envelope still sitting on my desk, untouched. I smiled slowly. No, I said. What? Why not? He stammered. You don't understand. We've got a problem. But before he could finish, I interrupted. Relax, Ryan. I know exactly what I'm doing. He was breathing heavily on the other end, clearly desperate. Tony, you don't get it. If you don't sign. I glanced at the papers, at my signature line still blank, and felt a deep, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. I'll think about it, I said, my tone calm but deliberate. And this time, I truly meant it. Because I knew that whatever panic had made him call like that, it meant something had gone wrong. The week after Ryan's panic call was the first time I felt a creeping, uncomfortable tension that wasn't just about the inheritance. It was the realization that I'd underestimated how far my family would go to get what they wanted. I'd always known they were manipulative, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even discreet. It was an outright display of how far they could betray me and still call it family responsibility. It started with small things. Mom texting late at night, trying to guilt me with subtle reminders. Ryan is worried, Tony. Don't you care about the family? Dad calling incessantly during work hours, pretending to check in while hammering me with arguments about loyalty, responsibility, and how I was letting everyone down. Every time I picked up, I could hear Ryan in the background, laughing, coaching them, almost enjoying the show. He knew exactly what buttons to push, and it was sickening. I refused to engage, just as I had after Thanksgiving. But I could feel their patience thinning, their tolerance for my stubbornness fading. That was when the email started. Long, carefully worded messages from Mom and Dad, often CCNG Ryan, detailing how the family could suffer if I didn't sign the inheritance papers. Each email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation, reminders of sacrifices made for me, lists of opportunities one had wasted, and, of course, praise for Ryan's achievements. It was relentless. Then came the phone call I wasn't expecting, my grandmother's lawyer. Mr. Tony, she said, her tone calm but slightly hesitant. I need to inform you of a development. There's been an attempt to move your inheritance without your consent. My heart stopped. What do you mean? It appears that Ryan submitted some forms to access the funds. The signatures were Forged, she said slowly, like the words themselves were difficult to speak. I haven't filed anything yet, but if this were real, it could become a criminal matter. I sank into my chair, gripping the edge of the desk. Forged signatures? I had known they were manipulative. I'd even expected them to pressure me endlessly. But this was a level of betrayal I hadn't imagined. Has anyone contacted the authorities? I asked, my voice tight. Not yet, she said. I wanted to speak with you first. You're the only one authorized to take action here. I ended the call and stared at the envelope on my desk. My inheritance wasn't just being used against me, it was being stolen. The realization hit me like a punch. Everything, the taunts, the fake concern, the pressure, they were all a prelude to this. And it was Ryan. Of course it was Ryan. My parents had always backed him, but I'd never thought he'd go this far. Not legally, not criminally. The next day, I confronted him. He answered the phone with his usual smirk. Hey, Tony, did you think about signing yet? I know what you did, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The lawyer called. You tried to forge my signature. There was a pause. Then he laughed, low and nervous. Oh, come on. You think I'd do something like that? That's crazy. I have proof waiting to be filed with the authorities if you deny it, I said steadily. Do you really want this to go that far? Tony, you're overreacting. I don't know what you're talking about, he said quickly, the charm slipping. You're making this into a bigger deal than it is. Mom and Dad would never approve of you accusing me of something like that. Mom and Dad don't matter, I said, the fury rising slowly but steadily. What matters is that you broke the law and betrayed every ounce of trust between us. The line went silent for a long moment. Then, with a bitter laugh, he said, You've always been the cautious one, the one who thinks rules matter. I guess that's why you'll always be the failure in the family's eyes. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. He had spent our entire lives making me feel small, and now he was daring to attack me in the only place I had any control, my grandmother's legacy. The betrayal was sharp and deep, a twisting knife I couldn't ignore. I didn't respond. I hung up and immediately called the lawyer back, instructing her to hold all funds, document the attempted forgery, and prepare legal measures to protect my share. I wanted Ryan to feel consequences, and this time, I wouldn't let fear or guilt stop me. Over the next few days, the dynamic in the family escalated. Mom began texting constantly, her tone shifting between faux sweetness and simmering desperation. Tony, please, we're just trying to keep the family together. Ryan didn't mean any harm. I didn't respond. Dad tried his usual combination of intimidation and appeals to loyalty. He showed up at my office under the pretense of checking in, and even tried to corner me in the parking garage to talk things through. I stayed calm, asked him to leave, and watched as he stormed off muttering about ingratitude. Ryan, meanwhile, became erratic. He called, left voicemails, even tried showing up at my apartment. Once, I opened the door to him leaning casually against the doorframe, grinning. Come on, Tony, he said. We don't have to make this awkward. Just sign, and it's over. I'm not signing anything, I said, stepping forward. You're ridiculous, he shot back, voice rising. Do you have any idea how much you're hurting the family? Mom's upset, Dad's frustrated. You're making everything harder for them. I'm protecting myself from you, I said firmly, and I won't apologize for it. He scowled, but before he could respond, I shut the door, leaving him staring at the empty hallway. That night, I replayed the last decade of my life in my mind. Every joke, every snide remark, every slight favor he received while I was ignored. Every time my parents smiled at him and turned away from me. And now, this, an actual forgery, an attempt to steal something that belonged to me. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the clear, undeniable message. I didn't matter. Not my opinions, not my boundaries, not my dignity. Everything I had worked for, everything I had been careful to build, could be taken away with a pinch stroke and a bit of collusion. The next morning, I got a knock at my door. I opened it to see my lawyer standing there, holding a file. Mr. Tony, she said, I need to show you something. She laid the papers on my table, Ryan's attempted forged signatures, a copy of the submission he'd tried to make, and email chains showing him coaching my parents to encourage me in his signing quickly. The evidence was undeniable. The betrayal was not only real, it was calculated. I felt something inside me shift. Until now, I'd been patient, holding back, giving them chances, hoping maybe they'd come around or act like decent human beings. But this was beyond manipulation. This was a conscious decision to steal from me, to break every boundary I had set, to turn my own family into accomplices in a crime. And suddenly, all the anger, all the hurt, all the years of quiet suffering became fuel. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every forced laugh at Thanksgiving, they all boiled up inside me. I wasn't just upset. I wasn't just frustrated. I was seeing clearly for the first time exactly how toxic and entitled they were, and how much they had underestimated me. I sat back, staring at the papers. Ryan had thought he could get away with it. Mom had thought she could manipulate me into signing without realizing I was aware. Dad had assumed he could intimidate me into compliance. They were all wrong. For the first time, I felt a sense of power. Not revenge yet, not really, but clarity. And with clarity comes planning. I knew that the next move would have to be precise. Legal measures, documentation, and timing were critical. I couldn't just react emotionally. I had to strike in a way that would leave them no room to argue, no chance to manipulate. And yet, as I looked at the forged signatures, the calculated messages, and the desperate calls from Ryan, a small, sinister part of me couldn't help but imagine the satisfaction when the truth came out. When they realized that the one they had always mocked, the one they had always dismissed, was now fully in control of the situation. After discovering Ryan's forgery, I thought the storm would hit immediately, but it didn't. For a while, all I had was silence. It was as if the universe had paused, waiting for me to make the first move. I tried to go about my normal routine, focusing on work, exercising, and keeping a low profile, but the emotional weight was heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the sting of being not just underestimated, but attacked by the people who were supposed to care about me the most. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of family dinners, holidays, and conversations, each one now tainted by the clarity that they'd never valued me. I won't lie, it hurt. It hurt in a way I hadn't let myself feel in years. For decades, I'd absorbed their jokes, their favoritism, their subtle dismissals, telling myself it didn't matter, that I was strong enough to rise above it. But this, Ryan's audacity, my parents' enabling, was the breaking point. I realized just how small and powerless I had felt all my life, how much I'd buried my own needs and opinions to avoid conflict. For a few days, I let myself sink into that pain. I stopped replying to texts, ignored the calls, even turned down dinner invitations. I wanted to feel the emptiness, the betrayal, to let it settle into my bones so I could understand it fully. It was during one of those long nights that I had a moment of clarity. I realized that wallowing in anger wouldn't help me, not truly. I couldn't change them, and I couldn't make them see me the way I deserved. But I could change myself. I could walk away from the toxicity, yes, but I could also turn the situation into something I controlled. That realization was like a spark. Pain had given me focus. Betrayal had given me resolve. I started quietly. First, I set strict boundaries. No more unannounced visits. No more emotional blackmail via calls or texts. I blocked Ryan's constant messages on my phone, redirected my parents' emails to a folder I rarely checked, and stopped answering calls from the extended family who only passed along Ryan's commentary. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue. I simply took control of what I allowed into my life. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. Then came work. I immersed myself in projects I had delayed for months, focusing on skill development, leadership opportunities, and networking. My work performance skyrocketed. It was almost ironic. After years of being seen as quiet and unambitious, I became indispensable at my company. I was offered a promotion to a managerial position I hadn't expected, one that came with authority, respect, and a noticeable salary increase. For the first time, I wasn't being compared to Ryan. I was recognized on my own merits. I savored that quietly, not for ego, but because it was validation that I could succeed without anyone's approval. Alongside my professional growth, I worked on myself personally. I picked up hobbies I'd long ignored, spent more time exercising, and even traveled for a week to a quiet mountain cabin, disconnecting entirely from the family drama. Those moments alone, free from the constant barrage of judgment and comparison, were restorative. I realized I had spent so long trying to earn their approval that I'd neglected my own happiness. Despite all this, the inheritance situation lingered in the back of my mind. I didn't act impulsively. I let it sit, observing. I spoke with my lawyer regularly, discussing contingencies and legal strategies. I knew I had leverage, but I didn't rush. Power, I realized, was most effective when measured, precise, and undeniable. Ryan's desperation, my parents' manipulations, all of it would eventually come to light, but only when I was ready. The turning point came quietly, in one of the most ordinary moments. I was walking home from work on a crisp autumn evening, earbuds in, listening to nothing in particular, when I saw a small cafe I'd never noticed before. Inside, the owner was struggling, a few tables empty, paperwork scattered across the counter. Something about it spoke to me. A project, a challenge, an opportunity to create something of my own without anyone's interference. I went inside, struck up a conversation with the owner, and within a week, I had made arrangements to help him streamline operations, modernize the business, and eventually invest. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I was building something independent, something they couldn't touch or belittle. Life started to improve in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had financial security I controlled, a growing professional reputation, and a sense of self-respect I'd never experienced in the family environment. The more I focused on my life, the less the family's toxicity weighed on me. I started to see them for what they were. People whose approval I didn't need. People who thrived on control and manipulation, and people who would never respect boundaries or recognize my worth. Yet, even as I built my own life, the shadows of betrayal lingered. Ryan continued to call occasionally, his tone increasingly desperate, though he never mentioned the inheritance outright after the forgery exposure. My parents oscillated between feigned concern and passive-aggressive messaging, but their attempts to draw me back became less frequent. They knew they were losing control. That knowledge gave me a quiet satisfaction, though I didn't flaunt it. I wasn't interested in petty revenge at this stage. I was interested in building, in strengthening my position, and in watching their influence over me crumble. During this period, I also reconnected with friends I had long neglected, people who had witnessed my family's favoritism and had supported me in small ways. Their encouragement, their validation, became another source of strength. I realized that the love and recognition I had been chasing from my family could be found elsewhere, and often, it was more genuine, more unconditional. A few months in, I was at a point where my personal and professional lives were flourishing in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. The cafe project was thriving. My promotion at work gave me authority and influence, and I had established a clear boundary between myself and my family. I was no longer reacting to their manipulation. I was anticipating it, and I was ready for the moment when action would be necessary. It was during a quiet evening, sitting in my apartment with a view of the city lights, that I realized something crucial. The power had shifted. For decades, my family had believed I was weak, passive, and easily swayed. They had underestimated me at every turn. But now, the quiet one, the one they called a failure, had control over the very thing they had tried to steal from me. I had resources, knowledge, and a plan. And most importantly, I had patience. That patience would be key. I didn't want impulsive revenge. I wanted precision, timing, and impact. I would not just assert myself. I would reshape the dynamic entirely. Every insult, every act of favoritism, every betrayal had been cataloged and internalized. They had unknowingly equipped me with the insight and motivation to turn the tables. And then came the day that made everything tangible. I received an email from my grandmother's lawyer. Ryan had sent another message, this time through his own attorney, claiming that I was deliberately obstructing the release of funds and threatening legal action. The desperation in his tone was palpable even through the formal language. I smiled quietly, reading it over and over. He didn't know how carefully I had prepared for this, how thoroughly I had documented everything, or how patient I had been while building my own power quietly in the background. I realized, in that moment, that the rock bottom I had experienced, the betrayal, the manipulation, the isolation, had been a necessary crucible. It had forced me to focus, to grow, to strategize, and to rise. They had pushed me to the edge, and instead of breaking, I had emerged stronger, more capable, and more independent than they had ever imagined possible. And I knew, without a doubt, that the next time I interacted with them, the balance of power would be unmistakably mine. Every insult, every attempt to undermine me, every joke at my expense, they had been training for this moment. I wasn't going back to being the quiet one. I wasn't going to argue or beg or explain. I had what I needed, and I was ready. Yet, as I sat there, savoring the calm before the storm, I also knew that the final act hadn't yet been played. Ryan was panicked, my parents were manipulative as ever, and the family dynamic still simmered beneath the surface. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them. I was waiting, observing, and preparing. And when the moment came, I would move. Because they had underestimated me for the last time. It started quietly, the way most significant shifts do, almost imperceptibly. By the time I realized how much ground I had gained, I had already positioned myself in a place my family would never have expected. I wasn't just Tony, the quiet one, the failure they laughed at over Thanksgiving turkey. I was Tony, the one with the leverage, the knowledge, and, most importantly, the patience to wait for the perfect moment. The key had been strategy, not anger. After the forgery attempt and the series of manipulations, I realized that anything reactive would only give them ammunition. They thrived on chaos, on drama, on the opportunity to twist guilt and emotion to their favor. So I started planning carefully, in the background, with absolute discretion. My lawyer was briefed not just on the inheritance, but on every potential move they could make. Every document was cross-checked, every communication cataloged, and every interaction with Ryan or my parents was recorded, literally and figuratively, to ensure that the next time they tried anything, they would have no room to maneuver. Meanwhile, I expanded my personal power quietly. The cafe project I had stumbled upon months earlier had grown into something significant. I wasn't just investing in it. I was running it, modernizing it, transforming a failing little shop into a thriving business with a steady clientele. What had begun as a distraction from family drama had become proof of my capabilities, something tangible and independent that no one could take from me. I also leveraged my position at work, earning respect from colleagues and leadership, expanding my influence in ways that made it nearly impossible for Ryan or my parents to belittle me professionally. I even began cultivating subtle connections outside the obvious. I networked strategically, made introductions for people I trusted, and began quietly building a circle of support and influence. None of this was visible to my family. They still saw me as the background character, the one who didn't matter. It was perfect. Let them think I was passive. Let them assume they still held the upper hand. And then came the opportunity. It was a simple invitation at first, a casual family gathering under the guise of celebrating Ryan's new success. I knew instantly it was designed to pressure me again, perhaps even guilt me into finally signing the inheritance over. But this time I was ready. I arrived calmly, dressed sharply, radiating the quiet confidence that came from finally knowing my worth. Ryan immediately noticed, his smirk faltering for a split second. He tried to hide it with his usual bravado, but the subtle shift in my demeanor didn't escape him. Mom's eyes widened just slightly, as if she were suddenly aware that this wasn't the same Tony she'd been mocking all these years. Dad, predictably, tried to maintain his stern, patriarchal posture, but there was tension there too, a tiny crack in the armor of their assumptions. The gathering began as expected, polite conversation, Ryan subtly boasting about his achievements, Mom highlighting how proud she was of him, and Dad chiming in with that familiar combination of praise and condescension. I listened, nodded politely, and let them talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't react emotionally. Instead, I observed. Every word, every gesture, every attempt to manipulate me was cataloged mentally, every micro-expression noted. Then it was time. I asked casually, almost offhandedly, "So, Ryan, did you happen to submit those inheritance papers again?" The room froze. Ryan's eyes darted nervously, his smile slipping. Mom's hand went to her mouth, the color draining from her face. Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. I don't know what you mean," Ryan stammered. I smiled faintly. The attempt to forge my signature, of course. The one that could have become a criminal matter. Remember that. Ryan's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, but no words came out. He looked around at the table for support, but there was none. My parents, who usually swooped in to mediate, were silent, their faces betraying shock, and perhaps a first real glimpse of fear. I leaned back, calm, deliberate. It's fascinating how quickly panic sets in when a plan doesn't go as expected. Mom finally found her voice. "Tony, please, this isn't the place." "No, Mom," I interrupted gently. "It is the place. Because you've all been operating under the assumption that I would continue to let you belittle me, manipulate me, and even break the law without consequences. But that assumption was a mistake." Ryan tried to interject. "Tony, come on. It was just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I said, voice measured. "Forged signatures aren't misunderstandings. Coaching my parents to pressure me? Not a misunderstanding. Mocking me at every opportunity? Not a misunderstanding. What you've all done is calculated. And I've documented everything." I pulled a folder from my briefcase and set it on the table. The weight of it seemed to make the air denser. Inside were copies of emails, recordings, and notes, all meticulously organized. "This," I said, tapping the folder lightly, "represents every attempt to undermine me, every manipulation, every act of entitlement you've relied on for years. Every single one of you is implicated if this escalates legally." Ryan's face went pale. He stammered, tried to smile, tried to deflect, but it was useless. For once, he wasn't in control. Mom's hand shook slightly as she reached for the folder, but I stopped her with a gentle shake of my head. "No, this is mine. And it's not just evidence, it's leverage. You've had the power to define me for decades, and now the power has shifted." I paused, letting the words settle. "I've built a life you can't touch, Ryan. I've gained professional respect, financial independence, and a reputation based entirely on my own merit. And I've done it quietly, while you and Mom and Dad spent all your energy underestimating me." My parents exchanged glances, Mom's lips pressed thin, Dad's jaw tight. Ryan's bravado crumbled entirely. "Now," I continued, "I'm going to make something very clear. The inheritance is not going to Ryan, not until there is absolute transparency, accountability, and respect. And I will not tolerate further manipulation. You've had your chance." I watched the shift at the table, the subtle but undeniable recognition that I was no longer the powerless sibling. My calm, measured delivery, coupled with the undeniable evidence, had completely reversed the dynamic. No more jokes, no more casual dismissals, no more unearned authority. They had been forced to confront a reality they had refused to acknowledge for decades. Ryan's voice was low, almost pleading. "Tony, we can work this out. Please, just sign." "I already told you," I said, leaning back with a slight, controlled smile. "I will decide when and how any of this moves forward. And if you think panic or threats will change that, you're sorely mistaken." I watched as the room fell silent. The power wasn't just mine legally or financially, it was psychological. They were seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. And it wasn't the timid, quiet Tony they'd tried to mold and manipulate. This was someone who had endured, observed, planned, and finally acted with precision. Over the next hour, the conversation shifted subtly. They tried to negotiate, to reason, to charm, but every tactic failed. I responded calmly, never raising my voice, never losing control, never giving in. Each attempt to manipulate was met with polite, firm boundaries. Each feigned outrage was met with calm acknowledgement. Each guilt trip was deflected with reason. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and they knew it. By the end of the evening, I left the house with the same quiet satisfaction I had felt months ago when I first realized I was done letting them control me. But this time, it was different. This time, I had executed a plan, and the consequences were undeniable. I wasn't just walking away. I was walking away in control, with authority, with power, and with a future completely untainted by their toxicity. The knowledge that I had turned the tables, that I had taken what they thought was weakness and transformed it into strength, filled me with a sense of satisfaction I had never experienced before. The quiet one, the failure in their eyes, had finally become the one in control. And this was only the beginning. By the time the fallout hit, it wasn't dramatic or chaotic in the way Ryan or my parents might have imagined. There were no screaming matches, no doors slamming, no public spectacles. The power of what had unfolded lay in the quiet, unshakable shift in dynamics, and the way it slowly and irrevocably settled in their minds. The first sign of real impact came a week later. I was at the cafe, reviewing a spreadsheet with the owner, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Ryan had sent another email. I opened it cautiously, expecting the usual mix of panic and empty threats. But this one was different. It was terse, clipped, almost apologetic in tone, though clearly forced. I'll wait for your instructions regarding the inheritance. I understand your position. It was a strange mix of relief and disgust reading it. Relief because I knew he'd realized the fight was over. Disgust because it took him so long to understand the consequences of his own actions. And yet, beneath the surface, I knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. My parents were the ones who would feel the real effects. Within days, it became apparent that Mom and Dad were reeling, though they tried to keep appearances. I didn't make calls. I didn't confront them directly. I simply continued living my life, quietly and deliberately. And the consequences found them in the ways I hadn't even needed to orchestrate. Mom began noticing that her influence over social circles, family friends, and even extended relatives had eroded. People who had once eagerly supported her overreach now hesitated, unsure if her judgment or intentions could be trusted. Small comments reached her through the grapevine. Friends remarking on how Tony seems more in control than ever or seems unstoppable in his career. That left her unsettled. The same woman who had once subtly orchestrated manipulation at family events now found herself unable to command attention, forced instead into observing someone she had dismissed for decades. Dad, on the other hand, began feeling the professional and personal sting. Word got out quietly within his own social and business circles that his family's affairs were not handled transparently and that his favorite son, Ryan, had attempted to engage in forgery to access family money. The embarrassment was subtle at first, small glances, hushed conversations at events where he used to be authoritative and confident. Then came the calls from colleagues, gentle but pointed inquiries about whether he had really been aware of Ryan's actions, whether oversight had failed. He tried to wave it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. In professional settings where he once thrived, that doubt grew quietly, undermining the gravitas he had always relied upon. Ryan was the most obvious casualty. Once the realization hit that his usual tactics, bravado, manipulation, charm, were ineffective, he became visibly nervous around extended family and mutual friends. No longer did his usual jokes land or earn him admiration. People treated him cautiously, aware that he had attempted something unethical. Even Mom and Dad, who had been his cheerleaders for decades, had begun to subtly distance themselves, unsure if they should continue defending him. The arrogance that had been his shield was gone, replaced with a cautious, hesitant demeanor. All the while, I continued building my own life. The cafe was thriving under my management and strategic oversight, drawing in new clients and expanding revenue. My work performance had propelled me to a new level of influence and respect. But the real satisfaction wasn't in these achievements alone. It was in watching the ripple effect of consequences reach the very people who had underestimated me for so long. The quiet, invisible victories accumulated steadily, each one chipping away at the foundation they had assumed unshakable. The final confrontation didn't need to be staged. I didn't have to call them out or flaunt my power in a dramatic showdown. Instead, it unfolded organically through their reactions to the changes that my patience, planning, and resilience had brought about. Mom stopped sending veiled, guilt-laden messages, realizing that her attempts to manipulate had lost all effectiveness. Dad no longer tried to corner me or issue subtle threats, knowing that I was untouchable in the ways that mattered. And Ryan stopped calling altogether, too ashamed, too aware of the irreversible consequences, and too cautious of the legal implications if he pushed too far. One afternoon, I received a formal letter from Ryan's lawyer, a carefully worded document acknowledging the failed attempts to interfere with the inheritance and proposing an official settlement. All future requests would require transparency and mutual consent, and no further legal action would be pursued if compliance was maintained. I read it calmly, setting it aside. It was the final acknowledgement of the power shift, not a dramatic battle won with force, but the quiet, undeniable validation that the tide had turned. The moment that truly crystallized the entire journey came on a Sunday morning, when I sat at my kitchen table, enjoying my coffee, listening to the soft hum of the city outside. I glanced at the unopened envelope from my grandmother's lawyer, still sitting neatly on my desk, and I realized something profound. The last decade of manipulation, favoritism, and betrayal had ended, not with confrontation, but with patient, deliberate action. The people who had sought to belittle me, control me, and steal from me were left to confront the consequences of their own choices. They were still my family by name, but the dynamic that had defined our interactions for so long had been irrevocably altered. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about respect. It was about finally being seen as the person I had become, someone who couldn't be undermined, manipulated, or dismissed. The calm satisfaction I felt wasn't bitter. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional, destructive sense. It was the quiet, composed awareness that I had endured the worst, planned meticulously, and executed with precision. I had turned weakness into strength, betrayal into leverage, and silence into authority. In the weeks that followed, the changes became permanent. My parents grew distant, their attempts at control replaced with a cautious, almost reverent observation. Ryan avoided any situation where I could exert influence over the inheritance, the family, or our mutual connections. I attended family events when I chose, on my own terms, and each interaction was a subtle assertion of control. No one mocked me, no one belittled me, and no one tried to manipulate me again. And yet, the most satisfying moment wasn't in their silence or fear. It was in the understanding that I had done this entirely on my own terms. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't resorted to public shaming or humiliation. I had simply waited, observed, planned, and acted strategically. The result was unmistakable. My life was mine, untainted by their manipulation, my worth recognized without their approval, and my control absolute. Sitting back in my chair, I finally allowed myself to smile, a slow, satisfied smile. The storm had passed. The betrayal had been answered, not with chaos, but with calculated power. The family that had underestimated me for decades had finally learned, in the quietest but most undeniable way possible, that the one they had mocked was the one who held the true control. And in that moment, with the city humming softly around me and the envelope unopened yet fully secure, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. They had lost their power, and I had gained everything. I had finally won. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.